how's it going? I'm IlaGolden and welcome to my vlog. Alright, so today we are talking about Giya and the Giyans. Would rather be talking about the next one now, but considering that this needs to be covered at some point and there's no point in putting it off, and it's not something that I'm not looking forward to talking about. It's just something I keep forgetting that I want to talk about more than anything else. I figured, now seems like a good time as any to tackle it, especially since it rolls quite nicely off of the previous vlog. So, as I mentioned in, I think, the multiverse vlog, Giya is what's left over from the original multiverse. I have my multiverse canon open next to me again, just because it's great resource for me to be able to double check my own facts. I don't have an infinite memory, guys. Anyway, according to what I've written in the multiverse canon, Giya is the 10% left over from the original universe. But how large 10% actually is pretty hard to determine because it's constantly growing and constantly changing and constantly expanding. So even though it's all that's left of the original universe, it's more than what it was when the multiverse started to form around it. It's made up of two layers, or two parts, with the outer Giya being mostly where I set things when I'm working with Giya directly, and not just, using it sort of like a cross realm portal. And then there's inner Giya. Outer Giya is primarily the home of the dead. It's not so much an afterlife exactly. It just happens to be where most of the dead end up congregating and living if they've got nowhere else to sort of go. They are not the only inhabitants. They are the primary inhabitants, but they're not the only inhabitants of outer Giya. With the idea being that if you want to live in Giya, you can live in Giya. If you want to do something else with your afterlife, you can do something else with your afterlife. It's just one of those things. And then there's inner Giya, and inner Giya is home to the Giyans, which is the other thing that I want to talk about on today's vlog, and I think they're probably going to be the primary focus. So I think I've covered about as well as I can explain Giya between the multiverse one and this one now. Giya is essentially what's left over of the original universe. It's connected to all parts of the current multiverse, and although it's got lots of interesting regions and it's so varied, it's constantly changing and constantly growing and constantly expanding and becoming something new. So there are all these different parts of it, and there are all these different landscapes within it, and it's to write about the various different parts of Giya is quite interesting, but you can't really say more about it than that without then going into spoiler territory for the various things that I've written. So that's about as much as I can say. So we will jump into talking about the Giyans. Now obviously the Giyans are the inhabitants of inner Giya for the most part. They are also left over from the original universe. They are the only surviving breed from the original universe. They were the only beings not completely destroyed in the destruction of the rest of the original universe. There was one other being that did survive, but I won't go into that. With the exception being the mistresses, and of course. The Giyans have an extended mortality. So they are not immortal. They are classed as being high beings because they are powerful, and their extended life expectancy is pretty long, to the point of them almost appearing immortal, but there are various ways they can die, and there are various ways they can be killed, and it's far easier to kill them than it is to kill anybody on any of the level of the immortality, any of the different variations of immortality. So they are definitely have an extended mortality rather than being immortals. They are very interesting in that they have an outer shell which pretty much looks like, you know, your average human, and then inside that they have their true form, which is a spindly being of light, which tends to be very tall and lanky, and incredibly difficult for people to sort of make out what it is. You know, in the same way of, if you look at a source of light directly, you might not necessarily be able to see what that source of light is. It's kind of blinding a little bit, that sort of idea. But within that, they have, you know, if you can see through that light, you can see through this shape which kind of looks like something but kind of doesn't look like something, then you actually see that their inner self looks exactly like their shell. It just happens that they've got this, you know, to the perception of others, they look like this spindly being, yet if they were to be viewed by another Gaian, they'd be able to see that actually it's just this bright light surrounding what is essentially what they look like normally. However, because most of the people who encounter the Gaians are not Gaian, they only perceive the beings of light and the light form, unless they're dealing with them in their outer shells. And their outer shells really only sort of was developed by them so that they could interact with other beings without causing the other beings immense amount of harm. And it also protects their true light self as well, because in that state they are more vulnerable. In that state they are more susceptible to harm and more susceptible to damage, because obviously, you know, because reasons. Most members of the Gaian breed have a secondary soul, because most extended mortals don't have an afterlife, and they are definitely an extended mortal who do not have an afterlife. What they have instead is a secondary soul, and their particular type of secondary soul is called a synth. A synth can survive, or can coexist with its Gaian, as in it doesn't have to, like in the Gaian, it can manifest itself as its own physical being. However, if its Gaian were to die, the synth would also stop existing. But if the synth were to die, the Gaian would keep on living. The idea is basically a Gaian can take one hit that should absolutely kill them and lose the synth instead. It's basically like having a, you know, a one-up. An extra life. An extra life token. A lot of Gaians tend to, for that reason, keep their synths fairly close at hand and don't let them sort of have their own existence, because, you know, if they lose their synth, they, you know, basically cut their life expectancy in half, so to speak, or they, you know, they're in much more risk. There's much more risk to them if something were to happen to their synth, so it makes more sense to keep their synths close. But some Gaians just allow their synths to sort of develop their own personalities and have their own sort of freedom, because, you know, they'd much rather, you know, this secondary being who is there for their sake deserves to have some reward for what is essentially, you know, just being an extra life. So the attitudes towards synths vary from Gaian to Gaian. Gaian are high higher beings and they are god class, so they have the power of a god. They are not considered demigods or gods because the only beings that sort of worship the Gaians are unrealms that they themselves have created, and because unrealms fall into their own weird category that counts but doesn't count, that's why they're not exactly classed as being gods or demigods, because, you know, you've created this thing just to worship you, therefore you're not giving the person worshipping you the freedom to choose whether or not it worships you. Which, you know, as we discussed before, you know, it's the choice to worship, or the freedom to choose to worship particular beings that turns them into gods, rather than, you know, them deciding that they want to be gods. So Gaians have this awkward little midi phase of not being gods or demigods, but being higher beings and god class, and sort of being worshipped, but not really, because, as I said, unrealms sort of fall into their own weird classification, and at some point I will probably do a vlog where I go into a lot more depth talking about unrealms and what makes an unrealm and why they get the short end of the stick all the time. Okay, so the Gaian civilization is currently divided into 5 houses. So you've got the Arya, with the word Arya being derived from the Etin word for Aryasen, which means fairy. You've got the Dreos, which is derived from the Etin word Dreosen, meaning gargoyle. You've got the Seth, which comes from the Etin word Sethsen, meaning changeling. You've got the Nanik, which is the Etin word for knighted, or knight. And then you've got the Morella, which is the shortened word, the shortened Etin word Akamorella, which means mortal. So, as I said, currently there is 5 houses. Originally there were 4 houses. So your original 4 houses were the Nanik, the Arya, the Dreos, and the Morella. The Nanik sort of held the position of being the peacekeepers, of being the mediators between the other houses. They were almost thought of as being sort of the leaders within the Gaian civilization as it was sort of at the very beginning, and then when the original universe just became this fragment and became part of the wider multiverse, the Morella, who took advantage of this new multiverse in order to expand their power, partly because they themselves are not, they are the only Gaian who are not born with synth. So they have an extended mortality, but that is all they get. They don't get that second chance like the others do. And that made them very much more willing to sort of add to themselves through these new breeds that were sort of appearing around them, to try to not necessarily create their own synth, but cheat the system to give themselves longevity, to give themselves more importance, to give themselves more power. The Nanik very much disapproved of this, because it was affecting the Morella's morality. It was affecting their way of thinking, and it was driving them. Basically, it was doing a lot of stuff to them that made them feel, or made the Nanik feel, that they were losing control of themselves. They were, you know, becoming a danger, not just to themselves, but to the rest of the Gaian community. And a sort of war, conflict broke out, which resulted in the Naniks disappearing and the Morella being banished to what eventually became one of the disconnected realms, or what became, just before they were banished there, or just after they were banished there, one of the disconnected realms, so that they couldn't use their power, essentially. And so they would no longer be a threat. But that sort of then left the Arya and the Dreos, who weren't necessarily the best at getting along, to sort of find some way of compromising, find some way of keeping their civilization going. And to do that, they created the House of Seth, or the Changeling House, which is essentially made up of mortals taken to replace their own Gaians, sent to various mortal worlds to live mortal existences and come back into the community sort of humbled by their experience, and to not have all the conflicts and everything else going on. So essentially the whole idea that the Seth House is made of changelings is quite literal. They are the mortals mostly, who have been taken in to mediate between the two then remaining houses, the Dreos and the Arya. And then when the mortal who is being exchanged dies, because obviously they don't have the same extended life expectancy, the original Gaian would come back and take that spot. But because they'd been raised in the mortal world away from the conflict, they then could continue the mediation, and basically the Seth were the replacement for Narnik for the Arya and the Dreos, and that was something they very, very much needed. So they just could not get along. The Arya and the Dreos get their names because their forms, in their light state, their perceived forms by other breeds, look like fairies and gargoyles, essentially. So in those sort of terms, they're kind of the more boring houses to talk about. But you know, the houses are interesting and diverse and similar and everything else all at the sort of same time. And as I said, you know, originally there were 4 houses, then there were 2 houses, and those 2 houses created the 5th house, or the 3rd house. And in modern now times, they are back to 5 houses again, but I'm not going to go too much into that. A lot of that is covered in YF the fanfic, which I may at some point have to post to a forum somewhere. Yeah, I won't go too much more into it than that. There are other things I've written that sort of happen after the 5 houses come back, or the other 2 houses return, which sort of mentions the events of YF. But I think, you know, at some point I will get YF up there and sort of officially there. just because I can. The Gaians have an interesting way of naming themselves. So it will sound like they have 3 or 2 names depending on how you break it down, but actually they write it all as one long name. So you have like Angelos Arya Dre, which is all one word, but it sounds like it's more than one name, and you know they'll shorten it. They'll either shorten it to like, you know, Angelos or, you know, whatever. But how they take their sort of house name is they'll put that at some point within this big block of a name, and then you're sort of identified like that. So, as I said, you've got Angelos Arya Dre, so the Arya is sort of what sounds like her middle name, but as I said, it's just one word. Just one word. Then you've got Gloria 4th Arya, where it sounds like it's her last name, but again, it's all just one word. Then you've got Raymond Dreos Sept Octo. I believe that's the name that they gave him. just because I wanted to be awkward. Again, he doesn't go by his full name, and that is one word. Dreos Reomenceptocto is all one word. But as you can hear, that's sort of in the middle, and then, you know, Archaeoseth, where the Seth part sounds like the surname, and that sounds like it's like Archaeoseth. Sounds like it could be two names. No, it's all one word. It's all one word, just because. There's no particular reason why they do that. I think it's just how they tend to write their names. They don't see a point in sort of breaking up these sections because it is their name, it's their title as well, and it's just their interesting little quirk. As I said, they quite often go by shorts rather than by the full thing, so Angelos goes by Angelos rather than Angelos Aria Dre, and, you know, Gloria rather than Gloria Fortaria. But it's just, you know, it's just how they structure their names, it's just how they sort of do things, and it's something that I find quite interesting. My word checker, my spell checker absolutely hates. How many words do I have to add? Yeah, it hates, because it's a nightmare of letters a lot of the time, and it's like, are you sure you don't want to break these up into separate words? No, they're all one name. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary of the Gaians without going into too much spoiler territory. As I said, there is a lot covered in YF the fanfic. Now, we'll sort of mention briefly, I think, what YF the fanfic is. For those of you who remember me talking about the tales, I was part of a Yu-Gi-Oh fans forum for a while, and YF is short for Yu-Gi-Oh fans. YF the fanfic is basically a story using certain forum posters who agreed to be in it, or who asked to be in it, and sort of using their screen names to create characters for this fiction, and it's called YF the fanfic because it's a fan of Yu-Gi-Oh fan site fiction. I don't know why the series is called YF or the YF fanfic saga. It is only like 7. I think it's only 7 stories long. I think it's not as anywhere near as epic as the Tale Saga. I tend to refer to them all as YF the fanfic, even though it's like 7 different stories. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, if I am to get it out there, I'll probably post it through some fanfic site opposed to actually getting it officially published, because else I'm going to have to go and find all of those individuals again and ask them if it's okay to use their avatar name or their screen names to actually, you know, officially publish it. But it's an interesting story. It's still part of the multiverse canon, so, or the multiverse lore, and it does sort of build up various things that do sort of get hinted at and referenced in things that I've worked on since. So it's one of those things that's not necessary for me to get it out there, but it would probably be quite nice just to sort of round out the experience. And it's one of the few times that I can actually use to use Giya and the Gaians to a good extent, and to like one of the fullest extents that I ever used them. So it would be nice to sort of, from that point of view, to sort of get it out there and, you know, let it see the light of day again. It's seen the light of day once. Let it see the light of day again. That would be quite fun and quite interesting. But at this moment in time, it's a big task to undertake, going through and editing it all and bringing it up to standard and making sure that everything is still canon, because the canon has, you know, shifted and altered a little bit since it was originally written, especially now that I know that I want everything to sort of have this slight connection to it, even if it's not, you know, a huge connection to it. So I do sort of need to go through and tidy up and whatever else, and that's I remember from doing the Tale Saga, that's pretty hefty undertaking. But at the same time, it would be nice to sort of, you know, make sure that everything that could be out there is out there. So that's the only reason why I'm mentioning it now. It's because that's the piece of work that I've explored, and I've utilised Giya and the Gaians to like a major extent, and everything is sort of set pretty much in Gaia. So I get to explore lots of different parts of Gaia. I get to explain lots of like Gaian lore and stuff like that, and it's really nice. So yeah. I guess that's all I want to say on that. Anyway, as I stated last time, what I wanted to be talking about in this one, but decided I should do this one first. The one I'm going to be talking about in the next one now is the McTays. And that excites me. I don't know if it should excite me or not, but it does, because I have a fondness for the McTays. I have a huge fondness for the McTays, and I don't know why. I probably shouldn't have as much of a fondness for the McTays as I do, but I do, so they're going to be quite fun to talk about. I hope this has been sort of interesting. I know it's been sort of rambly, and I've spent a lot of time looking at this screen here and trying to cover as much as I can without covering too much, and then talking about another piece of my writing which should be out there but isn't yet. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I will see you again next time. See ya!